Goblin Slayer, is it still the worst anime ever? So what's up guys, Foxen here. The very popular and controversial anime Goblin Slayer just had its finale. A few weeks ago I finally watched the first episode of it, and gave you my initial impressions. But now the story is complete, mostly anyway. So let's go ahead and dive into my quick thoughts on it. And I'm sure I'm gonna piss a few people off. But if you survive Goblin Slayer, you should be able to handle this review. So first off, what exactly is Goblin Slayer about? In case you really have no idea, Goblin Slayer is actually an isekai anime. At the very start of the series, you have the main character girl just dying, getting wiped the hell out. Fast forward to the Goblin Slayer world, she's now become this blonde lowly priestess or mage, something like that. The actual Goblin Slayer world is this typical isekai type of setting. You could become an adventurer and go off to do adventures, just joining a guild, doing quests, gaining money, potentially finding the Demon King. At the same time, hopefully your class doesn't suck, hopefully you're not born poor, and you definitely don't want to be a female in Goblin Slayer. More on this in a little bit. If I really want to compare this world to a different anime, just think like Konosuba, Re:Zero, Overlord, maybe even the recent Slime Isekai anime. It's pretty much that type of deal, except this world is supposed to be much harsher. And yes, this now gets into the controversial part of the first episode, the Goblin Grape stuff. Forget about fighting the Demon King. If you're just unfortunate or suck or weak in this world, potentially you could be taken out by goblins. On the other hand, if you're unfortunate to be a female and get captured, you're most likely going to become a goblin plaything. Goblin Slayer is clearly going for that shock value. They want you to hate the goblin's guts. For Goblin Slayer, in that regard, I honestly feel like it does a poor job at it. And I definitely do say that as someone that's seen a crap ton of anime. The rest of the stuff that involves the goblin playthings, even the stuff in the first episode, these scenes feel very watered down. I'm sure that the manga counterpart was much more graphic, and definitely the novel being much more detailed about this stuff. That being said, I do think that Goblin Slayer does succeed in its core message, which is this isekai-like type of fantasy world that's supposed to be harsh. You do have people dying left and right, and of course people violated, specifically females, by frickin' goblins. That's why, if that's all Goblin Slayer is going for, I do have to give it a lot of credit. They're gonna win you over like in the first episode. That is, if you actually stick around. So far, we've gotten a ton of isekai, fantasy world type of adventure settings. I think it's actually beneficial to have this more harsher setting, or at least something to point at. That being said, if you actually look at the top adventure isekai series like Re:Zero, Konosuba, or potentially even Overlord and the Slime Reborn series, if you actually examine those worlds in detail, it's not like those worlds aren't harsh too. If anything, for a lot of the stuff in Re:Zero, I actually felt a lot worse watching that. And then for Konosuba, I could say this as someone that's read the novels, that stuff in Konosuba is not all sunshine and rainbows. If anything, in the novel, they actually have something similar to Goblin Slayer, except that goes exclusively for males. And I'm talking about Kazuma. But let me actually take a step back here. I know some of you are just screaming, it's not supposed to be Re:Zero or Konosuba, those are top series. And sure, I'll give it that. I actually don't think Goblin Slayer is trying to be at those levels. So let's move on into talking about some of the other aspects about Goblin Slayer, like the world building and the actual quest. Will seem this group of individuals actually interesting, or at least enjoyable. The world is supposed to be this adventure or fantasy setting. Every now and then they do make some references to dice, and throughout the episodes you hear about the gods creating this in the past, potentially this being all a past game, and perhaps even an ongoing current game. It actually really reminded me of how the world was initially created for No Game No Life. What I really did like seeing was that as Goblin Slayer went on adventures with his party, here and there they would find ruins about this lost world, about how this whole place came to be. It was really a nice touch since it wasn't in your face about it. As for the actual goblin killing quest, and the actual fights related to those, if I want to be completely honest, there really wasn't anything too memorable in terms of fights. And the actual quests themselves, they really involved fighting goblins, collecting the reward, then repeat the next time fighting bigger goblin enemies. Whether that was goblin champs, goblin paladins, goblin hulks, goblin kings, they should have had explosion goblins. Unsurprisingly, for a series titled Goblin Slayer, you're going to be seeing a lot of different goblin fights. For the actual goblins themselves, they really don't have any depth to them. They're supposed to be enemies that are simply ultra bad guys. In other words, if you're looking to have a fleshed out villain, try something else. Goblin Slayer is really the type of anime in case you're in the mood for a harsher fantasy setting that's a little more edgy, potentially far edgier than similar series. Next up, let me actually get into the cast. First off, you have the main character of the series, Goblin Slayer. To be honest, this guy is like a piece of wood. You want to talk about personality? Well, you're not gonna get too much of that here. You're gonna get this ultra serious guy with very short replies, almost robotic, and potentially even blender if you actually know Japanese like I do. That being said, they actually use this guy pretty effectively. I mean, if I do have to point out something positive out of this series, it's just the interaction between these guys. Naturally, Goblin Slayer is going to be playing the straight man role. And yes, it's not by much, but Goblin Slayer does develop a little bit by the end of the series. Now getting into the rest of the party, just a quick intro. You got the blonde loli that warms up to Goblin Slayer, that likes to pee on herself, and even sleeps with Goblin Slayer. You have the 2,000-year-old elf girl, can you say extra loli? At first, she doesn't really like Goblin Slayer, but then warms up to him. And she also likes drinking, which I liked. You got the dwarf magic guy that likes to drink and also likes food. And finally the lizard guy that likes cheese and could summon the skeleton dog. I gotta admit that the actual male characters in this series aren't that memorable. On the bright side, my two favorite characters in the series involve the elf and the actual blonde mage. At the start of the series, I was really hoping that none of them would become Sakura. Or would that be Aqua in this case? Just take your pick. For the little loli mage, one of the things I really enjoyed for her in this series was her role in the actual party. She just gave you this different taste of the magic character type of role in this fantasy world type of setting. She's not supposed to be someone like Megumi that's super overpowered with a one-hit skill. The blonde girl is playing the supporter role that could make walls of light, could flash you, and heal you. But despite not actually being on the front lines herself, I never once felt that she wasn't needed. And there's definitely plenty of times that she uses her defense moves as offensive ones too, which is really nice. And that's actually another thing I enjoyed about this series, just seeing the tactics used in battle. Pretty often you do feel that this party is in real danger, that just a single wrong move and it could be totally wiped out. Although just like any series, it does have its questionable moments, like how exactly did Goblin Slayer survive that? Or forget about that, how is Goblin Slayer even walking or standing up? But anyway, for the second character I liked, the High Elf, Extra loli. The elf girl is a very skillful archer. And I don't know, perhaps I'm just weird, but I definitely always like seeing the elf characters in anime. That's why it really sucks when you get terrible versions of these characters. For the High Elf in Goblin Slayer, thankfully she wasn't just boobage. I mean, she doesn't really have any. And overall, I really like her design. On top of that, the thing that completed the package was just her fun personality, which goes along with her interaction with the rest of the group. Next up, let me actually bring up a potential negative for Goblin Slayer, which is Goblin Slayer really building his own harem throughout this series. Yes, this being a fantasy type of series, that is no surprise. I do have to mention that at some points it does seem like they're trying to play it up for laughs, since Goblin Slayer is not interested at all. This guy may not have anything down there, but I mean by the end of the series you have the whole town that freaking loves him after he takes off his freaking helmet. Since it was really playful, I didn't mind the stuff too much, except when it got to the sword maiden character. I mean, you have the super top tier hero character that once defeated the Demon King, supposedly. But oh, Goblin Slayer comes around, and suddenly this girl could freaking cut diamonds with her chest. She really wanted the Goblin Slayer D. I mean, at the very end of their encounter, she gets on the freaking ground and is just almost begging for it. I was like, what the hell am I watching? So I could definitely see that turning a lot of people off. As for something else as a potential negative, which is really the CG used for Goblin Slayer himself. For most of the action scenes and a lot of the faraway shots, they just chose to go the CG route for Goblin Slayer. And just being aware about the studio situations, I totally understand the decision. Often though, they don't do a good job mixing the two. Potentially, if you're more sensitive to this stuff, it's just gonna take you completely out of the story. Alright, so going back to the grape stuff at the beginning, let me become Mr. Unpopular now. I really think the reactions were overblown online for this series, especially when you have people calling this the worst anime ever. And just to be crystal clear, if you're the type that's sensitive to this stuff for whatever reason, totally fine. You don't have to like this, or you could even hate it. The overreactions I'm talking about are definitely the people calling this the worst thing to happen to anime in the longest time. That it shouldn't have ever been made, and so on. I mean, hey, it's not like anyone's forcing you to watch this. Hopefully. And this actually leads to the very end of the series, which says that Goblin Slayer role will return, which is like a season 2 confirmation. I gotta say, this was super surprising. Let me just mention some insider information. So I was actually in Japan in the first month or two when Goblin Slayer was airing. And of course, by now you're very familiar with this being super controversial worldwide, online. However, in Japan, I literally didn't see anything regarding Goblin Slayer. There wasn't any buzz about it, I didn't see Goblin Slayer promos, I didn't see it anywhere. So that Goblin scene got a lot of attention worldwide, but it definitely wasn't true in Japan. And I did check the figure sales for the novel and manga. They really weren't anything too special, like about 50,000 each. And just seeing the lack of reaction from Japan, I don't think this anime is actually gonna raise the sales by that much. So just going back to the original question, is Goblin Slayer really the worst anime ever made? I think by now you definitely know my answer. That's definitely not how I feel about it. I really don't think that Goblin Slayer is trying to be a top series like Re:Zero or Konosuba, or even the Reborn Slime series. If you aren't comparing it to those series, I think you might actually enjoy this series. I mean, you will have fun seeing these guys go adventure out and fighting some goblins, just beating out super ultra bad guys. If you are sensitive about the actual goblin stuff, I might even suggest just going past episode 1, at least that part. In the rest of the series, you only really see the aftermath, and that's very minimal. For myself, Goblin Slayer was fine, it was good. Potentially I'll forget about most of it by next week. Definitely by the time that season 2 comes around. But I don't regret watching it. But anyway, more important, let me actually hear from you now. What did you think about Goblin Slayer? How do you feel about the reactions that said this was the worst anime ever made? Does anyone else see that overblown? What did you think about the world and cast of Goblin Slayer? Who was your favorite? Come on, someone else has to like the blonde loli and elf too. Anyway, go ahead and smash that thumbs up and subscribe. If you're new to the channel, you can enjoy weekly anime videos like this one. Going into the new year 2019, I do plan to be covering a lot more anime series and doing reviews and breakdowns like this one. So let me know how you enjoyed this review. I didn't have too many notes for this one, and it definitely wasn't scripted out. I appreciate any feedback, and I'll see you guys later.